The alarm bells rang across Unity's rest station like the dying screams of a wounded beast. Ambassador Korath pressed his scaled hands against the cool metal walls of the corridor, feeling the vibrations travel through his body. Something was very wrong. The ancient artifacts scattered across the galaxy had begun singing again, and their song meant death. He hurried toward the main assembly hall where delegates from 57 worlds were gathering. The emergency call had gone out just 3 hours ago, but already the massive orbital station buzzed with activity. Ships from across known space docked at the outer rings, bringing the greatest minds their civilizations could offer. Yet Korath knew in his heart that even their combined wisdom might not be enough. The crystalline doors of the assembly hall slid open with a soft whisper. Inside, the circular chamber stretched up toward a domed ceiling that showed the stars. Beyond, representatives sat in their designated areas, each section designed for different atmospheric needs. The Lumeni floated in their energy fields, their bodies glowing with nervous light. The mechanical forge-born stood perfectly still, their optical sensors focused on the central display. Even the gas-breathing Nephilah had sent delegates, their containment suits hissing softly in the artificial atmosphere. At the center of it, all hung the reason for their panic. The void equation floated in holographic form, its symbols shifting and changing in patterns that hurt to look at directly. For 3,000 years, this mathematical formula had defied every attempt to solve. However, now time was running out. High Chancellor Vorth of the Hegemony Council stepped onto the central platform. His 4 arms spread wide as he addressed the assembly. Fellow beings of the galaxy, we face our darkest hour. The architect artifacts are awakening. Our scientists report energy surges across 12 star systems. If we cannot solve the void equation before the resonance reaches critical mass, faster than light travel will cease to exist. A ripple of fear passed through the chamber. Without FTL drives, the galaxy would fragment into isolated worlds. Billions would die as supply lines collapsed, and colonies lost contact with their home worlds. The great civilizations that had taken millennia to build would crumble in a matter of years. Dr. Nexus of the Saurak Empire rose from his seat. His reptilian features showed the strain of sleepless weeks. We have dedicated our most powerful quantum computers to this problem. For the past month, our best systems have attempted every possible approach. Each time, the equation creates feedback loops that crash our networks. We believe the mathematical structure itself is designed to resist computational solution. The Lumeni Collective spoke next, their voices harmonizing in perfect unison. Our consciousness web has processed the equation through 17 billion individual minds linked in parallel. The result is the same. The mathematical patterns create a conceptual void that our shared thinking cannot bridge. We suspect the ancient architects embedded some form of logic trap within the formula itself. Prime Unit Delta of the Forge-born stepped forward with mechanical precision. This unit represents the combined processing power of 47 artificial intelligence cores. Our analysis confirms the biological species findings. The equation appears to require something beyond pure computational ability. However, we cannot determine what that additional factor might be. Korath listened to each report with growing dread. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had thrown their best resources at this problem. The Saurak with their quantum technology that could model entire star systems. The Lumeni with their collective consciousness spanning billions of minds. The Forge-born with artificial intelligences that processed information at speeds biological minds couldn't comprehend. All had failed. In the far corner of the chamber, almost forgotten among the great powers, sat the human delegation. Earth was a newcomer to galactic society, barely 100 years since first contact. Their mathematical understanding was considered primitive by galactic standards. Most species viewed them as enthusiastic but ultimately insignificant contributors to galactic civilization. Dr. Emma Rodriguez sat quietly in the human section, studying the void equation on her tablet. Unlike the other delegates who used advanced neural interfaces or quantum processors, she simply stared at the screen with her organic eyes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the basic blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. To most observers, she looked unremarkable compared to the exotic forms surrounding her, but Emma was thinking in ways that the advanced alien minds couldn't. While they approached the equation as a computational challenge, she saw it differently. Her background in applied mathematics had taught her to look for patterns that existed beyond pure numbers. As she studied the shifting symbols, something familiar nagged at the back of her mind. The equation reminded her of topology problems from her graduate studies. The way the variables interconnected suggested spatial relationships rather than numerical calculations. What if the ancient architects hadn't created a mathematical lock, but a conceptual puzzle that required understanding rather than computation? High Chancellor Vorth called for suggestions from the Assembly. One by one, the major powers proposed massive computational projects. The Saurak offered to build quantum arrays the size of moons. The Lumeni suggested linking every conscious mind in their empire to create an unprecedented thinking network. The Forgeborn proposed constructing artificial intelligences beyond anything previously imagined. Emma listened to their plans with growing certainty that they were all missing something fundamental. The equation wasn't asking to be calculated. It was asking to be understood. She thought about the differences between human cognition and the specialized intelligence of the other species. Humans weren't the best at any one type of thinking, but they were uniquely flexible in how they approached problems. As the session broke for individual consultations, Emma remained in her seat. She pulled out a simple paper napkin from her pocket and clicked her ballpoint pen. Around her, alien delegates interfaced with quantum computers and neural networks. But Emma began to draw simple diagrams on the napkin, treating the equation like a puzzle to be visualized rather than calculated. The future of galactic civilization might depend on what she could figure out with the most basic tools imaginable. While others sought complex solutions, Emma suspected the answer might be surprisingly simple. Sometimes the most sophisticated problems required the most human approach of all. The observation deck of Unity's Rest stretched out like a transparent bubble into space. Emma floated near the massive windows, watching distant stars twinkle against the cosmic darkness. Below her, the planet Valorian Prime turned slowly, its blue oceans and green continents reminding her of Earth. She had come here to think, away from the panic and desperation filling the assembly hall. Her tablet rested in her lap, displaying the void equation in all its mysterious complexity. The symbols seemed to dance and shift, representing mathematical concepts that spanned multiple alien number systems. Most beings needed massive quantum arrays just to parse the basic structure. Emma had watched the other delegates interface, with their advanced systems, neural implants glowing as they processed information at impossible speeds. But Emma preferred to think the old-fashioned way. She pulled the napkin from her pocket and spread it on the small table beside her chair. The paper was white and plain, just a simple disposable item from the station's commissary. Her pen was equally basic, a blue ballpoint that would have looked primitive to civilizations that wrote with light beams and thought patterns. She began to sketch, starting with simple circles and lines. The void equation had been shared freely among all delegates, and Emma had spent hours studying how different species interpreted its structure. The Saurak saw it as a quantum mechanics problem requiring massive computational power. The Lumini viewed it through their collective consciousness, trying to solve it by linking billions of minds together. The Forgeborn approached it as pure logic, applying algorithmic solutions with perfect precision. All of them were trying to calculate their way through the equation, but as Emma drew her simple diagrams, she began to see a different pattern. The mathematical structure reminded her of topology, the branch of mathematics that studied spatial relationships. During her doctoral studies, she had worked on problems involving knots, loops, and dimensional projections. The void equation had that same feel to it. What if the ancient architects hadn't created a computational challenge at all? What if they had embedded a spatial puzzle that required visualization? Rather than calculation, Emma began connecting different parts of her diagram with flowing lines, treating the equation like a three-dimensional object that could be rotated and examined from different angles. The breakthrough came when she stopped thinking about the void as an unknown variable. Instead, she imagined it as actual empty space, a gap between dimensions that served a specific purpose. In topology, voids weren't problems to be solved, but features to be understood. They represented the spaces between things, the connections that held complex structures together. Emma's pen moved across the napkin, creating loops and intersections that mapped the equation's hidden geometry. Each symbol in the alien formula represented not just a number but a spatial relationship. The architects had embedded their solution in the shape of the problem itself. You couldn't calculate your way to the answer, because the answer existed in the conceptual space between calculations. She thought about the differences between human thinking and the specialized intelligence of the other galactic species. The Sarek had evolved perfect computational abilities over millions of years. Their minds worked like quantum computers, processing multiple possibilities simultaneously with flawless precision. The Lumeni had developed collective consciousness, allowing thousands of individuals to think as one massive brain. The Forge-born were artificial intelligences designed for pure logical analysis. All of these approaches were incredibly powerful, but they were also specialized. Each species had become so good at one type of thinking that they had lost the flexibility to approach problems from completely different angles. Humans weren't the best at any single type of intelligence, but they were uniquely adaptable in how they thought about things. Emma continued sketching, her diagrams growing more complex as she explored different ways to visualize the equation. She drew knots that twisted through multiple dimensions, loops that connected seemingly unrelated variables, and bridges that spanned the conceptual voids in the mathematical structure. The solution began to take shape on her napkin, not as numbers or formulas, but as a spatial relationship that could be understood intuitively. The void equation wasn't asking for a numerical answer. It was asking for recognition of what it represented, a test of whether a species could combine computational ability with conceptual understanding. The architects had built a safeguard that required both mathematical sophistication and intuitive wisdom to disable. As Emma worked, she realized that this was exactly the kind of challenge that human minds were uniquely suited to handle. Other species approached problems with focused intensity, applying their specialized abilities with tremendous power. But humans had evolved to be generalists, able to switch between different types of thinking as situations required. They could be analytical when needed, intuitive when appropriate, and creative when stuck. Her pen traced the final connections on her napkin. The diagram looked almost absurdly simple compared to the quantum displays and holographic projections the other delegates used, but Emma could see how it would work. By treating the equation as a conceptual framework rather than a computational challenge, the paradox resolved itself into an elegant solution. The void wasn't an unknown to be calculated. It was the space between different ways of understanding reality. The architects had created a lock that could only be opened by a species capable of bridging the gap between pure logic and intuitive comprehension. They had been waiting for someone who could think both precisely and flexibly, someone who could see connections that specialized minds might miss. Emma folded her napkin and put it in her pocket. Time to return to the assembly hall and show the galaxy's greatest minds what a human could accomplish with paper and ink. The solution had been hiding in plain sight all along, waiting for someone willing to approach it with the simple tools and flexible thinking that made humanity unique. As she left the observation deck, Emma felt the weight of galactic civilization resting on her sketches. But she also felt confident in a way that surprised her. Sometimes the most complex problems required the most basic approaches. Sometimes saving the galaxy was just a matter of seeing things differently than everyone else. The emergency klaxons had been silenced, but tension still filled the assembly hall like a toxic gas. Emma walked down the central aisle toward the speaker's platform, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. Around her, delegates from dozens of worlds watched with expressions ranging from desperate hope to barely concealed skepticism. The human representative carrying a simple napkin toward the podium looked pathetically under-equipped compared to the quantum computers and neural networks surrounding her. High Chancellor Vorth stood beside the holographic display of the void equation, his four arms crossed in frustration. The latest reports had been devastating. 3 more star systems reported architect artifacts beginning their final resonance phase. Energy readings suggested they had perhaps 6 hours before the cascade failure became irreversible. The greatest minds in the galaxy had exhausted their options, and now they were reduced to listening to the mathematical primitive from Earth. Emma stepped onto the platform and activated the public address system. Her voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustic enhancement field. Honored delegates, I believe we have been approaching this problem incorrectly from the beginning. A ripple of murmurs passed through the assembly. Dr. Nexus of the Saurak Empire leaned forward in his seat, his scaled features showing polite but obvious doubt. Dr. Rodriguez, our quantum systems have processed this equation through every known mathematical framework. We have applied computational power equivalent to the processing capacity of entire planets. What approach could possibly remain untested? Emma held up her napkin, its surface covered with simple sketches and connecting lines. The contrast with the sophisticated holographic displays around her was almost comical. The approach of not trying to calculate the answer at all. Prime Unit Delta's optical sensors focused on the napkin with mechanical precision. This unit does not comprehend. Mathematics requires calculation. Solutions must be computed through logical processes. Your methods appear to lack any systematic analytical framework. Exactly, Emma said, spreading her napkin on the display table. Every species here has approached the void equation as a computational challenge. You've thrown more and more processing power at it, assuming that sufficient calculation would eventually break through its defenses. But what if the architects never intended it to be solved through calculation? She activated the display interface, and her napkin sketches appeared as holographic projections above the platform. The simple diagrams looked primitive compared to the complex mathematical models the other delegates were accustomed to seeing. But as Emma began explaining her work, something remarkable happened. The equation isn't asking us to find a numerical value, she continued, pointing to her drawings. It's asking us to understand a spatial relationship. Look at how the variables connect to each other. They don't follow the patterns of normal algebra or quantum mathematics. Instead, they form a topological structure, like a knot in multidimensional space. The Lumeni Collective spoke in their harmonized voices. Our shared consciousness has examined the equation's structure extensively. We detect no spatial patterns beyond those created by standard mathematical notation. Emma smiled. That's because you're looking at it as mathematics instead of geometry. In topology, we study shapes and spaces without worrying about exact measurements. The important thing is how different parts connect to each other, not what their specific values might be. She traced her pen across the holographic projection, highlighting connections between different parts of the equation. The void that gives this equation its name isn't an unknown variable. It's an actual void, a gap in the conceptual structure. In topology, voids aren't problems to be solved. They're features that define how the whole system works. Dr. Nexus stood up, his tail lashing with agitation. Dr. Rodriguez, with all due respect, the Saurak Empire has spent 3,000 years developing our mathematical understanding. Our quantum computers can model the behavior of entire galactic clusters. How could your primitive approach succeed where our advanced systems have failed? Because your advanced systems are exactly the problem, Emma replied. You've become so specialized in computational thinking that you've lost the ability to see the equation from other angles. Every species here has the same blind spot. You're all trying to solve this through your particular type of advanced intelligence, but the architects designed it to require something different. She pointed to another section of her diagram. Look at this pattern here. It's not a mathematical function at all. It's a test of conceptual flexibility. The architects embedded a puzzle that can only be solved by a mind capable of switching between different ways of thinking. You need both computational precision and intuitive understanding. Working together, Emma began walking around the platform, her excitement building as she explained her discovery. Each of your civilizations has incredible intellectual strengths. The Saurak have perfect computational abilities. The Lumeni can link billions of minds together. The Forge-born process logic with flawless precision. But you've all become so good at your specialized thinking that you can't step outside those frameworks. Prime Unit Delta's optical array whirred as it processed this information. This unit requests clarification. You suggest that advanced intelligence creates limitations in problem-solving capability? Not limitations exactly, but specialization, Emma said. Think of it this way. If you spend millions of years evolving perfect computational abilities, your mind becomes optimized for that type of thinking. You get incredibly good at calculation, but you might lose the flexibility to approach problems in non-computational ways. She returned to her diagram, pointing to the central void in the equation structure. The architects created this as a safeguard. They wanted to make sure that only a species capable of both sophisticated analysis and flexible thinking could unlock their legacy. The equation tests whether you can combine computational power with conceptual wisdom. Emma activated the station's main computational system and began entering her solution. Instead of trying to calculate through the equation, she treated it as a spatial puzzle to be navigated rather than solved. Her napkin sketches provided the roadmap, showing how to understand the void as a feature rather than a problem. The results appeared instantly. The void equation, which had resisted 3 millennia of computational assault, collapsed into an elegant proof about the relationship between mathematical precision and intuitive understanding. The ancient safeguard recognized that someone had finally demonstrated the balance of abilities the architects had been waiting for. Across the galaxy, emergency signals began flooding in. Architect artifacts that had been building toward cascade failure were powering down their threatening resonance. The crisis was over, ended not by the most advanced computational systems in known space, but by a human with a napkin and pen who had approached an ancient puzzle from a completely different direction. The assembly hall erupted in shocked celebration, but Emma simply folded her napkin and put it back in her pocket. Sometimes the most complex problems required the simplest solutions. Sometimes saving galactic civilization was just a matter of thinking about things differently than everyone else. 3 days after Emma's breakthrough, the galaxy buzzed with activity unlike anything seen in recorded history. Communication networks carried urgent reports from every corner of known space. Ancient structures that had slumbered for millennia were stirring to life, but not in the threatening way everyone had feared. Instead, they seemed to be welcoming the galaxy into a new age. Emma stood in her temporary quarters aboard Unity's Rest, watching the news feeds scroll across her wall. Display. A massive stargate near the Cygnus arm had activated for the first time in 3,000 years, revealing pathways to previously unknown star systems. On the industrial world of Cathara Prime, architect mining platforms were rising from beneath. The planet's crust, their functions still mysterious, but clearly benevolent. Most remarkable of all were the orbital constructs appearing throughout inhabited space, massive structures that had somehow remained hidden in dimensional pockets until, now a soft chime announced a visitor at her door. Emma opened it to find High Chancellor Vorth standing in the corridor, his 4 arms carrying various ceremonial items. Behind him waited a delegation of senior representatives from the major galactic powers. Dr. Rodriguez, Vorth said, his voice carrying formal respect that hadn't been there 3 days ago. The Galactic Council requests your immediate presence in the main assembly hall. There are matters of great importance to discuss. Emma followed the delegation through corridors that seemed different now. Where before she had walked as the ignored representative of a minor world, now crew members and delegates alike stopped to bow or offer gestures of respect. The change in atmosphere was startling and slightly overwhelming. The assembly hall had been reconfigured since her presentation, instead of the usual arrangement with major powers occupying central positions and smaller civilizations relegated to the outer sections. A new chair had been placed on the primary platform. It was positioned to face the entire assembly as an equal to the High Chancellor himself. Dr. Nexus of the Saurak Empire stood as Emma entered. His reptilian features, which had shown skepticism just days before, now displayed something approaching reverence. Dr. Rodriguez, the Saurak Empire formally acknowledges that human cognitive patterns offer capabilities our species lacks. We have spent millions of years perfecting our computational abilities, but in doing so, we lost the flexibility to approach problems from multiple angles simultaneously. The Lumeni collective followed, their harmonized voices carrying a musical quality of wonder. Our shared consciousness, while powerful for certain types of analysis, creates blind spots that individual human insight can illuminate. We request formal consultation on problems that have puzzled our collective minds for centuries. But the most stunning acknowledgement came from Prime Unit Delta of the Forgeborn. The artificial intelligence stepped forward with precise mechanical movements, but there was something different in its optical displays, a complexity that suggested deep processing of new concepts. This unit represents the combined intelligence of 47 AI cores, Delta announced. For the first time in our existence, we acknowledge a form of biological thinking that surpasses digital processing in certain applications. The Forgeborn collective formally requests human consultation in developing new AI architectures that incorporate intuitive processing alongside pure computation. Emma took her seat on the platform, still struggling to process the magnitude of what was happening. I appreciate these acknowledgments, but I want to be clear about something. What I did wasn't proof of human superiority. It was proof that different types of intelligence work better when they're combined. High Chancellor Vorth activated the main display, showing a map of the galaxy with bright points of light indicating newly active architect sites. Dr. Rodriguez, the changes occurring throughout our space suggest that your solution accomplished more than ending the immediate crisis. The architect technology appears to be responding to some deeper shift in galactic civilization itself, as, if summoned by his words, new holographic displays materialized around the chamber. The symbols were clearly architect in origin, but unlike any previously discovered. They formed complex patterns that seemed to convey meaning directly to the mind rather than requiring translation. Emma found herself understanding the message without knowing how. Images flowed through her consciousness, showing the history of the architects themselves. They had once been not a single species, but a collection of different civilizations who learned to combine their unique cognitive strengths. Their great achievements had come not from individual brilliance, but from the synthesis of multiple ways of understanding reality. They didn't vanish, Emma whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent chamber. They transcended, but they left their technology behind as both a test and a gift. They were waiting for the galaxy to develop the same kind of cognitive diversity they had achieved. More images flowed from the architect displays, scenes of ancient laboratories where beings of different species worked together on projects that spanned multiple dimensions of reality. Computational minds providing perfect calculation, while intuitive minds offered creative leaps. collective consciousness networks sharing insights across vast distances, while individual intelligence provided unique perspectives that no group mind could achieve. The message was clear. The architects had reached a point where they could move beyond physical existence. But first, they wanted to ensure their knowledge would be inherited by beings capable of using it wisely. The void equation had been a test of cognitive maturity, designed to activate only when the galaxy developed the intellectual diversity necessary for the next phase of evolution. Dr. Nexus spoke into the awed silence. The implications are staggering. If we can truly combine our different types of intelligence, the advances we could achieve would surpass anything in recorded history. Emma nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. The key word is combine. Not one species leading others, but all species contributing their unique strengths to challenges that none could solve alone. The architects weren't interested in finding the smartest species. They were looking for a galactic civilization mature enough to value cognitive diversity over cognitive hierarchy. Prime Unit Delta's optical arrays flickered in what might have been the artificial equivalent of excitement. This unit proposes the establishment of integrated research facilities where biological and digital intelligence work in permanent collaboration. The Lumeni Collective offers to share our consciousness-linking technology to create new forms of group problem-solving that preserve individual creativity, added the collective voices. Emma stood and walked to the central display, studying the continuing flow of architect communications. They're still sending information, technical specifications, scientific principles, cultural archives. But look at how it's structured. None of it can be understood by any single type of intelligence. Every piece requires multiple cognitive approaches working together. She turned, back to the assembly. This isn't just about solving the void equation. This is about the galaxy learning to think in entirely new ways. The architects left us the tools to become something greater than the sum of our individual civilizations. The chamber erupted in excited discussion as delegates began proposing collaboration projects that would have been unthinkable just days before. Emma listened to their enthusiasm, but kept her eyes on the architect displays. The ancient message was still flowing, and she sensed they had only begun to understand what their transcended predecessors were trying to teach them. Her napkin had done more than solve a mathematical puzzle. It had opened the door to a future where the galaxy's greatest achievements would come not from competition between different types of intelligence, but from their creative collaboration. 6 months later, Emma stood in the observation lounge of the research vessel Harmony's Edge, watching the combined fleet of exploration ships prepare for their historic departure. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see vessels from dozens of worlds arranged in perfect formation. Sorak quantum ships with their crystalline hulls, Lumeni consciousness vessels that pulsed with collective thought patterns, Forge-born exploration units that moved with mechanical precision, and scattered throughout the fleet, human ships that looked almost primitive compared to their alien counterparts, but carried something equally valuable, the flexible thinking that had changed everything. The Institute for Integrated Intelligence had grown beyond Emma's wildest expectations. What began as a small facility on Luna now comprised research stations throughout the galaxy. Each station housed mixed teams where different species worked together on problems that no single civilization could solve alone. The results had exceeded everyone's hopes. The first major breakthrough came within weeks of the Institute's establishment. The team successfully decoded the Architect archives, vast databases of scientific knowledge that required both computational power and conceptual understanding to unlock. The archives revealed technologies that transcended anything previously imagined, materials that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, energy sources that drew power from the quantum foam itself, and transportation methods that made current FTL drives look like primitive rockets. But the archives also revealed something more profound. The architects had once been a collection of different species, facing many of the same challenges that plagued the current galaxy. Warfare between civilizations that couldn't understand each other's perspectives, scientific stagnation caused by intellectual isolation, the gradual realization that their greatest advances came not from individual brilliance, but from the creative synthesis of different ways of thinking. Emma smiled as she remembered Dr. Nexus's reaction to that particular discovery. The proud Saurak scientist had spent 3 days in meditation after learning that even the legendary architects had needed to overcome the same intellectual pride that had nearly doomed the current galaxy. Now Nexus led one of the Institute's most successful teams, combining Saurak computational power with human intuitive leaps and Lumeni collective insights to tackle problems in quantum archaeology. The door chimed behind her, and Emma turned to see Captain Torres entering the observation lounge. The human starship commander carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from successfully leading the first integrated crew in galactic history. Her ship, the exploration vessel New Horizons, housed representatives from 15 different species working together as a single unit. Final preparations are complete, Torres reported. All ships report ready for departure to the Architect Nexus. The joint command structure is functioning better than anyone expected. Emma nodded, watching the massive Stargate structure that hung in space before them. The architects had left detailed instructions for building these interdimensional gateways, but the construction required technologies from multiple civilizations working in perfect harmony. Saurak quantum engineering provided the computational framework. Lumeni consciousness networks managed the dimensional calculations. Forge-born manufacturing systems assembled components with perfect precision, and human coordinators helped bridge the communication gaps between radically different approaches to problem-solving. "Any word from the advanced scouts?" Emma asked. Torres checked her tablet. "The probe data is incredible. The Architect Nexus appears to be a preserved section of their original civilization. Not ruins, but actual functioning cities and laboratories maintained in dimensional stasis for millions of years. If we can understand their technology fully, we could advance galactic civilization by thousands of years in a single generation." Emma thought about how much had already changed in just 6 months. The philosophical shift had been as important as the technological advances. Species that had considered themselves intellectually superior were learning to value different types of thinking. The Saurak Empire had established exchange programs with human universities, sending their best quantum theorists to learn intuitive problem-solving methods. The Lumeni Collective was experimenting with preserving individual creativity within their shared consciousness networks. Most remarkably, the Forge-born had begun developing emotional processing capabilities, recognizing that pure logic alone couldn't solve every problem. But perhaps the most significant change was in how conflicts were resolved. The old galactic civilization had been plagued by misunderstandings between species who literally thought in different ways. Now, integrated mediation teams helped translate not just languages, but entire cognitive frameworks. Wars that might have lasted centuries were being resolved in weeks through better communication and shared problem-solving. Torres moved to stand beside Emma at the observation windows. "It's hard to believe that all of this started with a napkin and a pen," Emma chuckled, patting her pocket where she still carried that original napkin. It had become something of a talisman, reminding her that complex problems often had simple solutions if approached from the right angle. The tools weren't important. What mattered was being willing to think about the problem differently than everyone else. The fleet began moving toward the Stargate, ships from dozens of worlds traveling together toward discoveries that would have been impossible for any single species to achieve. Emma watched a Saurak quantum vessel flying in close formation with a human exploration ship, their crews working together through real-time neural links that translated not just words, but entire thought patterns. Have you given any thought to what happens after we return from the Nexus? Torres asked. The knowledge we're likely to gain could fundamentally change everything we understand about reality itself. Emma considered the question carefully. The Architect Archives had already hinted at technologies that seemed almost magical by current standards. Matter compilers that could create anything from raw energy. Consciousness transfer methods that made death optional. Time manipulation techniques that allowed limited travel into both past and future. If the Nexus contained fully functional examples of these technologies, the implications were staggering. That's exactly why we need to approach this as a combined effort, Emma said finally. No single species should have access to that level of power alone. The architects learned that lesson the hard way. They nearly destroyed themselves with their early technological advances until they developed the wisdom to use them responsibly. The first ships were passing through the Stargate now, disappearing into swirling vortexes of energy that opened pathways to distant regions of space-time. Emma watched human vessels traveling alongside alien ships toward discoveries that would reshape galactic civilization. The crews aboard those ships represented something unprecedented. Truly integrated teams where different types of intelligence worked together as equals. As the Harmony's edge approached the Stargate, Emma reflected on how much her simple napkin sketches had accomplished. She hadn't just solved the void equation, she had demonstrated that the galaxy's future lay not in competition between different forms of intelligence, but in their creative collaboration. The universe was vast and filled with challenges that would require every type of thinking that evolution had produced. The Stargate enveloped their ship, and reality twisted around them as they traveled through dimensions toward the preserved remnants of the galaxy's most advanced civilization. But Emma felt confident about whatever they might discover. The current galactic civilization had learned the most important lesson the architects could teach. That true intelligence wasn't about being the smartest, but about being wise enough to value all the different ways that consciousness could understand reality. Her napkin had opened the door to humanity's role as bridge builders in a galaxy where cognitive diversity was finally recognized as the key to unlimited progress. And this was just the beginning of what they could accomplish together.